Hey, Michael with XForce PC. I want to talk about our mainstream gaming system. This is sort of a mid-level gaming system, but don't be fooled. It has as its foundation a lot of high-end hardware, and so I'll talk about that a little bit. Now, the first thing that sort of sets this thing apart from other entry-level or budget-focused gaming systems is this has a Z series motherboard from Intel. And so if you don't know what that is, that's the enthusiast chipset from Intel. And it includes a number of goodies. One of the big things is you can do overclocking with it. So if you got a K series processor, it would support overclocking. It has more PCI Express lanes than the other chipsets. And so, recently, some of the tech bloggers that I watch sort of do some of the same things I do, except in a more generic manner. I kind of focus on X-Plane. They bought a Walmart gaming PC and took it apart to see what was in it, and were kind of surprised. One of the things that Walmart did is they put an H-series motherboard in it. And the H-series motherboards, that's the lowest end chipset that Intel sells. And then they turn around and they put a pretty good processor, an 8700 and a GTX 1070 along with it. And then they included an LED controller for lighting and a little remote control so you can change the lighting and make it the lights flash and everything. And my thought is, really, Walmart, spare me the LEDs and give me a motherboard that makes sense. It just made no sense to spend the money on doing LED lighting and use an H-series motherboard. The same kind of holds true for the power supply, so we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, some of the other things that the Z-series motherboard supports is up to 64 gigs of RAM. And it has 4 memory slots. So on this system, you can see the memory here probably. I don't know how well you can see it, but there are 4 memory slots. We'll populate it with 2 sticks of RAM. On the H-series boards, there's only 2 memory slots. And since they give you 16 gigs of RAM, I guess they're trying to be nice. They put one 16 gig stick in there. That way you could put in another 16 later down the road if you wanted to. But the effect of that is you're getting single channel memory. So you may or may not know, but when you have 2 sticks of RAM in and they're identical and they're put in the correct slots, there's something called dual channel memory where you can read and write from both sticks of RAM at the same time and get a performance benefit. And with only 1 stick of RAM, you don't have that benefit. Now, another thing regarding RAM with the Z-series motherboards is they'll support much higher speed RAM. The H-series motherboards, I believe, top out at, their spec tops out at 2133, I believe, but they will technically support up to 2400 RAM, and so this Walmart PC had 24 megahertz RAM. Our system, since it's a Z-series, we're putting 3000 megahertz RAM. And in a recent video I did, I found that going from single channel 2133 RAM up to dual channel 3000 megahertz RAM actually made a 20% or close to a 20% performance difference in the frame rate of X-Plane. And it's just little details like this you would never know just reading the spec list on a budget-minded computer. But that really does make a huge difference. And then you have 2 memory slots open. That way, if 6 months, a year, 3 years down the road, you want to put in 2 more 8 gig sticks or 2 more 16 gig sticks, you can. And the system maxes out at 64 gigs of RAM instead of 32 gigs of RAM, which you find, again, on the more budget-minded motherboards. And we're going to continue on this trend of, the difference between, this system and just a common budget system. So as I was talking before about the H310 chipset that came with that Walmart PC, it has, the H310 chipset only has 6 lanes, six PCI Express 3.0 lanes. That refers to basically the amount of bandwidth that's on the motherboard. The Z-series chipsets have 24 PCI Express lanes. And so that's a huge difference in the amount of bandwidth you have. So if you're adding you know, more SSDs, or not on this system you wouldn't add a second graphics card, but on another system that's, you know, larger than this, if you added a second graphics card, you know, that would come into play as well. Another thing that this board supports is it supports every 8th and 9th generation processor that's out there that's based on the socket 1151 socket, which is a huge list of processors. Most notably, you have the 8400, 8500, 8600, 8600K, 8700K, and then you have the 9600K and the 9700K and the 9900K, just to name a few. That doesn't name all of them. And let's say, you know, a couple of years down the road, you decide you want to take this system to the max, and you want to add the i9 9900K. Well, you can do that because this is the, at least at this time until they come out with something else, you know, this is the highest end socket 1151 chip, and it is supported by this system. Now, another thing that differentiates this system from your Walmart branded system or some other common, you know, cheap gaming system is the power supply. Even though this is a budget-minded system, you know, we've got a budget-minded processor in here and a budget-minded graphics card, we still put a 700-watt power supply in here. And the one in that Walmart machine that I keep referencing was a 500-watt, and it wasn't even bronze certified 80% efficient. And so we, in here, have a 700-watt bronze certified efficient power supply. So it's 80% bronze certified, meaning 80% efficiency. And the other thing that this computer has is the ability to go, since it has that large, and I'm sorry if that sliding sound is making noise, but it has the large power supply allows you to put in a bigger graphics card, and I'm going to have to slide again. But let's say down the road you decide I want to put in a 2080 Ti, an RTX 2080 Ti. Now I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but you could do it. You just come in here, snip off these two little cable ties where I've got the power for the video card cable tied off so it'd be nice and neat, and unplug that. Let's get that unplugged. I'm just trying to be gentle here. And you'll notice on this power supply cable you have two 8-pin power connectors. Then you just take your Big Daddy 2080 Ti, which right now costs about $1,300, which is about as much as the entire system here. So again, that's why I really wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But you slide that in here, you see there's plenty of room, right? Plenty of room. You just pop out the other card. And then you have the two power supply connectors to plug that card in, which I guess I'll try to do here on the fly. So you plug in one, and then you plug in the other. And even though the 1060 that is in this system comes with or uses a single 6-pin power connector just because it doesn't need as much power, you still have the necessary power plugs there. Finally, it's not the easiest thing to do, to hook up a 2080 Ti, because you have a 700-watt power supply and you have two 8-pin power connectors. And actually down here, kind of cable managed up, there's actually another PCI Express connector. It will vary depending on which 700-watt power supply we have, but at the very least, you'll have enough to drive something like a 2080 Ti graphics card. Okay, let's talk about storage a little bit. So one thing this higher-end motherboard comes with is dual M.2 slots, and you might say, what's M.2? Well, M.2 is the new type of hard drive that most progressive PC builders are using. So this is your hard drive, or your SSD is on this thing. It's about the size of a stick of gum, if you remember. I don't know if people chew gum anymore, but about the size of a stick of gum. And they get, at least at this time, up to 2 terabytes in size. I haven't seen anything larger than 2 terabytes. It may exist, I just haven't seen it. And so one thing that this allows for is a lot less clutter in the case. Again, I refer back to that Walmart PC. It had an old SATA style SSD, which required a SATA cable and a power cable. It's just extra cable clutter. And this board also supports higher speed. Now, we don't use the higher speed ones in here because it's really not necessary, but it does support the higher speed NVMe SSDs, which go at, instead of 500 megabytes per second, like 3,000 megabytes per second. But they cost more and they don't really make sense for this particular build, but you have the ability, if you decide later you want one of those ultra-fast NVMe, they look just like this, they're just got different circuitry in them. You could put that in there, and you could add a second one of these because there's two M.2 slots on the motherboard. Again, referring to the Walmart PC, there were no M.2 slots on the motherboard. The other thing we do over a lot of budget PCs is a lot of the budget PCs out there, they'll give you like a 256 gig SSD or even a 128 gig SSD, and then a mechanical hard drive to go along with that. So what ends up happening is, you know, the SSD is your boot drive, and you end up filling that up, and then you're like, oh, I guess I'm supposed to use this mechanical hard drive over here for something, but okay, I guess I have to like drag stuff over to it to make room on my SSD. So I'll drag my pictures over, and I'll drag my videos over, my music, and you know, and then it just becomes sort of a management nightmare. My philosophy has always been, I want to get a big enough SSD to where I can just keep everything on the SSD. I don't have to sit there and worry about, you know, moving things around so that I have room on my solid state drive. And so we give you a 500, the base system comes with a 500 gig SSD. It's not 128, not 256, but 512 or 500. And then we give you the option for a 1 terabyte SSD. Now, if you have crazy amounts of storage, you know, terabytes of storage, sure, you might want to hook up an external USB 3.0 hard drive and drag stuff off to it. But in general, you're flying X-Plane, saving a few documents, playing a couple of games, you know, a 500 gig SSD is going to do you nicely. And if you have any concerns at all, bump it up to the 1 terabyte. It's like $150, something like that. Not a bad upgrade. To double your hard drive space for like 150 bucks. And then you don't have to worry about, you know, managing your storage. Everything can just reside on one drive. And for most people that aren't power users, they don't want to be sitting there worrying about, you know, managing their storage and making sure that their SSD doesn't fill up. And in case you didn't know, I'll just mention, SSDs are dramatically faster than hard drives, old-fashioned hard drives. So boot times, load times, all that stuff is dramatically improved on an SSD. I mean, it'll make this whole system will just seem faster if you have an SSD. So they're really great to have. As one final note, this comes in a really nice case. This is a Corsair case. Now, it is possible we'll use a thermal take, which looks very similar to this, very, very similar. But they're nice and they're stately. They're not gaudy, but they're attractive. They've got good cooling. Typically, we have one fan here in the back, but we have the ability to put 2 more fans in the top, 2 more fans in the front. The motherboard actually has an additional fan header on it, which you or we can plug another fan into, and even with the splitter, you could run multiple fans off of that. The advantage of running the fans off of the motherboard is the motherboard has tons of temperature sensors, and if it knows how hot the processor is and the chipset is and all that, and it can speed up and slow the fans down as needed, rather than having fans that just are plugged into the power supply and they run full blast all the time, or you having to manually turn a knob to turn the fans up and down. Why not just have the motherboard go, hey, it's a little hot in here, I think I'll speed the fans up. And so that's the way we always do it. There is a little window on the side, and then, and again, I apologize if sliding around is making noise here. We got a couple of, you know, Wi-Fi antennas, multiple USB 2.0, 3.0, and so there shouldn't be issues for connectivity, and of course a gigabit Ethernet port as well. And that's pretty much a rundown of the mainstream gaming system. It's a definitely better than budget gaming system. It's a great foundation. We do give you the option, if you want right out of the gate, to bump the processor up and the graphics card, you can. But the ability to upgrade this thing later is also quite good when you consider the motherboard we're using and the power supply that we're using. So if you're not able to buy those real fancy peripherals, you know, the fancy graphics card and the fancy processor now, you know you have that option down the road if you think you need it.